into the sea, mountains into the sea.
Welcome to the Our State Book Club podcast. I'm your host, Wiley Cash. In this episode, we talk with novelist and short story writer Jill McCorkle about her recent collection, Old Crimes, which is the June selection of the Our State Book Club.
Mountains in the sea.
Jill, thank you for joining us again.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit about the stories in Old Crimes and the theme that unites them?
Yeah, they are united by regret. The epigraph of the book is Arthur Miller's, "Maybe all one can hope is to end up with the right regrets." Mm-hmm. And they all have some moment in life that's being studied. In a couple of the stories, it's actually happening in the story. But most of them, we're dealing with that kind of thing that just gnaws on someone or pulls them back to a place again and again.
So theme is a really interesting thing to me when I write. It's a very interesting thing when I read as well. And I've been thinking about it now in my career as a writer and as a reader and teacher, probably more than ever. And I've been talking about theme with my students at UNC Asheville as a tether, that once you know the theme of your piece, you can stay tethered to that theme and find your way in and out of the story. Do you know what your theme's going to be for a story until you finish it? How does it work for you?
No, I think oftentimes I find it along the way. Mm-hmm. Occasionally I have a vague notion of where I want to go, but as I said in the earlier podcast, I need to get to the end and then come back and start over. Yeah. And several of these stories were worked on at the same time. And I've found that when I work that way with a lot of stories in different levels, it starts to feel like working on a novel. Yeah. And so they do start echoing back and forth, and images that repeat and themes. Mm-hmm. And it's exciting when you see the theme, because then sometimes there's a level of clarity that I feel I've been searching for.
And I like what you said about sometimes you don't know what the theme's going to be until the end. And I think that for beginning writers or for maybe inexperienced writers, they see something like one of your stories and it's so gorgeously constructed and so laden with theme that they think, I could never do that. And the response is, well, you don't have to on the first draft. Right. That's what you do on the second draft or the third draft. That's once you get it on the page and you know what it is, then you go back and make the conscious decisions. Right. Right. Do you find yourself doing that?
Absolutely. And a guiding quote in my writing life, the first time I read, it's Thornton Wilder talking about our town. And the first time I read this, I was like, ooh, that explains everything to me, because he talks about the archaeologist's eye, and he says how the archaeologist's eye is a combination of that of the telescope with the microscope, that he explains the very distant by focusing on the minutia. Mm-hmm. And I was like, yes. I mean, because oftentimes I have, you know this character is grieving something or regrets, but you don't know what it is, and so that is so vague that the only way I can even begin a story is to pull all the way in and think, okay, where does this person work? Yeah. And then you start to get closer, or I think, what is the thing that's haunting this person, and let it grow out of the smaller events, days of a very particular life.
And that's something that I've told you this before, but that was something that I loved so much about Hieroglyphics, talking about excavation and archaeology, is the character, the older woman who is chronicling her life down to the minutia of items and drawers in the old house she left behind. And there is such magic in those dusty old things that we think we've forgotten, that you can pick them up and say, this is the stuff of life. Like someone's life was once wrapped around this thimble. It was very important to them.
Absolutely.
It's just so magical. In The Filling Station, which is one of my favorite stories in the new collection in Old Crimes, a memory has caused a man to return to a place where he excavates his past. We're talking about archaeology, apparently. And there's this gorgeous quote in the story where you write, he knew what he was doing. He knew this thing. He knew it was about feeling loved, but the equation seemed too difficult to even begin solving. Can you talk about the difficulty in solving these equations of memory? Of trying to unpack these long lost feelings or nostalgia?
Yeah, well, I think in that story in particular, he comes to understand that it was as simple as feeling that he was loved. That he's reaching for a time and place that really no longer exists as he knew it, but the emotion he felt at the time, he's trying to recreate. And I didn't know myself. I was kind of caught up in what's going on with the woman who works at the station, and I was completely intrigued by her life. I'm still not sure. I know it's not happy.
Yeah.
I know there are threats.
Certainly.
The little girl in the back of the truck,
so beautiful.
I know it's not happy. I know there are threats. But I only know what the character witnessed. For me, as a writer, that was the exciting part of that story. And I think I may have told you this. That man had been living in my drawer or box for over 20 years. And I had written the opening scene with him coming to this old filling station that had once been the home of his grandparents. And I never really got beyond, except that I knew he wanted to get back up in that room he once slept in as a kid and kind of hide there from this very successful life. And so it was exciting with this collection, because every other collection I've pulled him out in hopes of getting something to work. And so it surprised me this time. And I always had in mind the Elizabeth Bishop poem by that name, Filling Station, which is very much about those little rooms, you see over the station where you look closely and there's a doily on the back of a chair and the dog sleeps there. And the last line of the poem is, somebody loves us all.
I don't know that poem, but I feel like I do now.
Well, it's a beautiful poem, but it was one of those when I had the aha moment of, oh, well, I should have just kept reading the poem because it answered what the story was about long before I figured it out.
And what's interesting to me is in that story, the filling station, the man finds himself back in this room above the station and kind of makes a room of his own there. And then at some point in the story, that room is robbed. And I thought, what is that? What are we doing there? What's going on there? Are we saying that we can't go back and have things be the same? We can't go inhabit those old places? That we can visit them for a while, but we can't live there?
Yeah, it's all changed.
Yeah.
And again, I mean, let's talk archaeology, because I really think that's where the good stuff is, And I think when I'm writing a story, there's that present storyline, but then what I'm really interested in are the layers that came before it.
Sure.
And how can you imply, what's down below that may or may not ever even be seen.
Or even be something that the character's aware of.
Right.
But we're aware of it.
But that's my challenge as a writer, I think.
Yeah. Another story in the collection that I really loved is The Confessional, which follows the filling station. And it's a story about a young couple who buy a confessional from an old secondhand store, an old used furniture store. That kind of has this mysterious provenance is a little foggy. And they eventually kind of turned it into a game about confessing things with friends or to each other.
Boy.
And
A
then
very scary game.
A very scary game. It gets dark pretty quick. But what I loved about that story was it does the opposite of what the filling station does. The filling station begins with this man experiencing this abstract longing, and then he finds a place. The confessional begins with place and leads them to something very abstract. Can you talk about like the in and out of objects, like the portal of objects leading into an idea and the portal of objects leading out of an idea?
Oh, yeah, wow. That's a very good question.
Well, I got it from you, Jill, from reading my book.
Yeah, I was just seized by the idea of that confessional. I saw one when I was like scrolling through eBay. I like to look up all the old toys I had. Even better, those I didn't have and really wanted. And I love to look up all those things. And I saw this confessional. And I mean, that story kind of wrote itself as a result, And so it's very much about what you reveal and what you don't.
Yeah.
And it's about the difference in honesty and dishonesty, learning something about another person that changes everything.
Yeah. Obscuring and revealing.
Yeah. And there's a great William Trevor story, The Telephone Game, that did that for me, that kind of moment of recognition, that you can't take back.
We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with Jill McCorkle. This podcast is produced by Our State Magazine, celebrating North Carolina travel, food, history, and culture since 1933. Check out ourstate.com, where you can explore exclusive content like digital stories, YouTube videos, newsletters, and more. To have each month's issue delivered to your mailbox, visit ourstate.com/subscribe and enter promo code BOOKCLUB, one word, Book Club. That's BOOKCLUB for $5 off any regular or gift subscription. Jill, you and I have talked before about how scene-driven so much of Southern literature was in the 1980s and the 1990s when, both of us were kind of learning to be writers and what it meant to be a Southern writer. But your recent work has kind of stepped away from being scene-driven, and you write a lot about memory and kind of the vortex of memory. And I think of prose as primarily being divided into either scene or narrative summary. We're either seeing or we're thinking. And your short stories, especially in old crimes, have a lot of thinking. What's kind of led to that shift in your writing, are you doing that?
Yeah, I like the whole blend of scene and summary, and I've always been aware of trying to have a balance there. But maybe what it's grown out of is, getting tired of hearing show, don't tell. And for the past, 15, 20 years saying tell and show, the value in telling, the value in that kind of narrative summary. And a lot of writers I so admired early on, like Catherine Ann Porter, Carson McCullers. There were a lot of writers writing a lot of narrative summary, and I think I was just really intimidated by it.
Yeah.
Or read Virginia Woolf or somebody,
or
and William Trevor, and filled with admiration but intimidated.
Yeah.
So maybe I've just gotten braver as I've gotten older.
It's so funny you say that, because in my novel, The Last Ballad, there was a scene where the narrator had to share information that the characters did not have. and I couldn't figure out how to do it. And my editor was like, you writers in this show don't tell, Maxim, is killing opportunities. He's like, you need to tell. Then you have a narrator in this book, and the narrator needs to tell, and you need to get over it. Yeah. And it was like a golden ticket, to do that.
No, it's really liberating, and I've always been drawn to writers who strike that balance. Recent novels, Jane Ann Phillips, and Ron Rash's most recent novel. I mean, I'm just, I read so slowly when I read writers I admire because I am following that shift between.
And what I love about the stories in Old Crimes in terms of this narrative summary is we step into these characters' lives in the midst of them thinking about living their lives and reflecting on their lives. And so we don't often step into a hard scene where it's, I'm going to knock on the table, tactile scene. We step into the swirl of their living and thinking and being, and it's just so captivating. It's like a tide that just picks us up and puts us in the center of their pain or their longing, and we just know them immediately. And I just love that about the collection, and that about Hieroglyphics and Life After Life, and so much of your recent work. What are some tricks that you use to keep writing when you're not at your desk, to keep living in your work, to keep thinking about it?
I think, well, before my kids were born, when I found my brain was focused in many different directions, I could remember it all. I can remember as a young writer, if I woke up in the middle of the night and I had an idea, all I had to do was turn my alarm clock upside down. And then when I woke up and saw it was upside down, I would remember the whole scene. And then I came to that place where I would be like, why in the hell is the clock upside down? And
somebody's broken into my home.
And I couldn't remember anything. And so, I'm just a compulsive note taker. And I always have pen, paper. I might try to give Siri a take a note, and she can't do my accent, so that's worthless. Pen and paper always. Yeah. And I feel like I think it's been years since I had a sense of designated, this is writing time, this is life. I mean, somewhere along the line, they just all got mixed in together. And for me, the work never ends. Yeah. It just, and it's a comfort to me. I mean, I guess it could be a detriment too, because I realize sometimes, sitting somewhere and I'm 1,000 miles away. Yeah. And I'm always very happy to go back into that place. But now it requires a lot of note-taking.
Well, I love what you just said about sitting somewhere and being 1,000 miles away because your mind is on the work back on your computer or your handwriting. And that's what your work makes me feel like, Jill. I mean, we're sitting in your dining room looking at this gorgeous painting of this, looks like a farmhouse at night. It's after dusk and these lights are burning in the windows, and there's such a sense of longing and nostalgia and wonder and mystery, and that's exactly what your work feels like to me. And so I love the thought of you sitting somewhere in real life and your mind being 1,000 miles away, and it feels like that painting.
Thank you. That's a wonderful compliment. That's an early Gail Lowry, a wonderful artist I really admire, and that painting is called Finding What Is My Own. And I was given a reading in Boone, 20 plus years ago, and I saw that. I was walking around before the reading, saw the painting, could not stop thinking about it, and went and spent my entire honorarium on it. And her work is prized and treasured. I mean, She's amazing. But yeah, if I had to pick an object, windows. You know, they're so, and I mean the obvious metaphor, you know, of windows. But I often ask my students, you know, is your character looking out or looking in? And so you can write the same story over and over, just changing whether you're observing or, you know, from which direction you're observing, either with the personal story or someone else's story.
That's a great place to stop, but we still have to do the lightning round. So I'm going to ask you some more questions.
Oh,
Jill, deceased or living, who do you think is North Carolina's most underappreciated author?
Oh, wow. These are hard questions. But you know what? I'm gonna go with the living, because I think the writer Michael Parker is someone whose work I admire so much. And you talk about somebody who can do that interiority in a way that just holds you fast. You feel like you've entered someone else's dream. This most recent novel, I am
the light of the world.
World.
Yeah.
Thank you. I knew I was going to get there. I'm the light of the world. I feel like I read it in one breath.
Wow.
You know, it just was completely absorbing.
He's a stunning writer.
Absolutely.
North Carolina coast or North Carolina mountains?
Coast. I'm a coastal plain person.
Yeah. As am I now, apparently, living in Wilmington. So I don't want you to feel like you have to answer this question and leave anyone out, but I do want to ask you, what are a couple of bookstores in North Carolina that you just can't get enough of, that have been particularly good to you or particularly important to your career?
Oh, wow. Gosh.
That's a hard question because we're so lucky in North
That's
Carolina.
a hard question. We're so lucky. How about if I talk about, you know, the early days of my career, and you know, Nancy Olson is no longer with us, but what she started with Quail Ridge, that was my first reading ever, and Nancy in so many ways was such a role model for so many other booksellers in this state, and really set a tone for community and being involved. And so following that, McIntyre's, they've been around for a long time, and Flyleaf, right down the road, and I'm in and out of there all the time, and wonderful Purple Crow Books right here in Hillsborough, and I love Malaprops, and I love Bookmarks, and
you just go on and on.
Scuppernong.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
You can't, and the Country Bookshop in Southern Pine.
Such a classic store.
I don't want to leave anybody out, but we've got a roundup of indies. Oh, the store in Salisbury.
Main Street Books.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Post Road Books. Yeah, we're so lucky. We are so lucky in this state.
You mentioned Nancy Olson. When I went to Quail Ridge on my first book tour, Nancy was still with us, and she said, "Oh, I haven't met you before. I tell everybody that Ron Rash is my boyfriend, but you might be my new boyfriend." And so I tell people that I was Nancy Olson's last boyfriend. Maybe she had others. I don't know about it if she did.
And I was her first reading ever.
Oh, wow.
And guess when she scheduled it? It was my first reading. It was her first reading. And it was scheduled during the state UNC football game that was happening at state.
Oh, goodness.
And so Nancy and I just sat there and had a good long conversation.
I've been there, Jill.
And we were fast friends forever. What a role model.
I love going to independent bookstores and they say, "I'm so sorry, we might have a low turnout tonight. There's a PTA meeting 4 towns over, and there's a Saved by the Bell marathon on, and you know how popular that show is. We made a flyer and hung it in the employee restroom, so we hope that people are going to make it." But they might not. And if they do, it's the same show as if they don't, right? We're just glad to be there.
Glad to be there.
Well, this was so fun, Jill. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
This podcast has been recorded and produced by Hunter Brady. Our theme music is by Wilmington, North Carolina's Beta Radio. Wiley Cash's wardrobe provided by Gentleman's Corner with locations in Wilmington, Cary, and Pinehurst.
What might it be like underneath the sunrise in a state of flight? Coming back on me, it seems wonderful, the wandering mountain birds on a beach. Never moments ever wasted, turning away from your love. Honeybees, gardens of sweeter fruit never tasted, no turning to other things. Will you be, will you seem? Sweeter fruit never tasted, don't turn your back on me. Mountains pushing into the sea, mountains empty.